That night, the house was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy on your chest. I kept my eyes closed, steady and still, pretending to sleep, though every sense in me was awake. I heard the soft creak of my drawer sliding open, the faint scent of her perfume drifting closer. My daughter-in-law thought I was deep in dreams, but I saw the shadow of her hand reaching for the keys. Then she froze. What she saw inside that drawer changed everything. Thank you for watching my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so go on and leave it in the comments. It means a lot to me. My name is Hazel, and I live here in North Dakota, in a quiet house that holds too many memories to count. I've lived long enough to know that some storms don't arrive with thunder. They come softly, like whispers in the night. And if you're not careful, they leave cracks you never saw coming. For a long time, I believed my home was my safe place, a place where I could grow old with peace in my heart. I trusted the walls, the faces around my table, the laughter that used to fill these rooms. I raised my son with love, with everything I had, and when he got married, I opened my doors again, thinking it was the right thing to do. I let them settle in when they needed help, never imagining that kindness would one day be twisted into something else. You don't see betrayal coming when it grows slowly, like a shadow stretching quietly across the floor. It hides in familiar footsteps, in smiles that seem harmless, in small conversations that don't make sense until it's too late. That night wasn't just about a drawer or a key. It was about years of trust sitting quietly in the hands of someone who never earned it. I lay there still as stone, listening, breathing carefully, letting every second carve itself into my memory. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. And once trust is cracked, it doesn't heal the same way again. I've always believed that a home should carry the weight of your history, not the weight of your fear. And for most of my life, this house did just that. I moved into it as a young woman, back when my hands were strong enough to scrub the floors myself, and my heart was full of plans I thought would last forever. My husband and I built this life with our own hands, one quiet day at a time, through years of long winters, early mornings, and the kind of love that holds steady even when the world outside feels cold. After he passed, the silence in these walls grew deeper. But I found comfort in it because it was honest silence, the kind that held memories, not secrets. I trusted my son to carry a piece of that same love, the way parents hope their children remember what they were raised with. But life has a way of showing you the truth when you least expect it. When my son married, I tried to welcome his wife with open arms, hoping to build something warm with her, hoping this house would feel like a home for all of us, not just me. At first, she smiled sweetly, always polite, always careful with her words. But there was a sharpness behind her eyes that I chose to ignore, because sometimes we silence the whispers in our hearts to protect the dream we've built. I told myself she just needed time, that one day we'd share tea in the kitchen and talk about ordinary things. But days turned into weeks, and the warmth never came. The house started to feel different, not in the way it looked, but in the way it breathed. Doors would close softly when I entered a room. Conversations would lower into murmurs I wasn't meant to hear, and laughter that once filled the hallway now belonged to hushed corners. I told myself not to mind it, but a woman my age knows when something isn't right. Trust doesn't break in an instant, it bends slowly until it snaps, and by the time you hear the crack, it's already too late. I held on to the hope that kindness would mean something to her. But deep inside, I began to keep my guard a little higher, my eyes a little sharper, and my heart a little quieter. I had spent a lifetime learning how to survive storms, and I could feel one gathering quietly inside my own home. The first signs didn't come crashing in like a wave. They crept in quietly, almost politely, as if betrayal wanted to make itself comfortable before showing its true face. It started with little things, small enough to brush off, but steady enough to leave a mark if you paid close attention. I would notice how she'd pause when walking past my room, not because she cared about me, but because she was measuring something. I'd hear them in the kitchen after dinner, whispering just low enough for me not to catch everything, but loud enough that I could tell the words weren't soft or kind. I'd walk into the living room and watch how their conversations fell flat the moment I appeared, as if my presence stole the air from the room. I told myself it was stress. Maybe the pressure of living under the same roof. Maybe their marriage was going through something I didn't understand. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something far colder. She started making herself more comfortable in places she didn't belong. She would walk into my room without knocking, pretending to be helpful, moving things on my dresser as if she owned them, rearranging little corners that had been the same way for years. It was my space, my last quiet corner in this world, and yet she entered it like someone testing boundaries just to see how far they could go. My son didn't see it. Or maybe he chose not to. He'd sit there, distracted, always defending her with a tired smile, saying she meant well, saying I was reading too much into things. But a woman who has lived as long as I have knows when someone is slowly drawing the line between what's theirs and what's yours. It was around that time that I began locking my drawer more carefully, making sure every key had its place. That drawer wasn't just wood and metal to me. It was the keeper of everything I held close. The key to the safe, old letters from my husband, legal papers, and the quiet proof of the life I'd built. I had tucked pieces of my heart and pieces of my strength in there. She didn't know what it meant to me, but I could feel she was curious about it. Her eyes lingered too long whenever she dusted that part of the room. Her fingers brushed the handle too softly for it to be innocent. There were nights when I pretended to be asleep, and I'd hear the faint creak of footsteps in the hallway, pausing right outside my door. She thought I was old enough to ignore it, but my mind has always been sharper than they think. I remember one particular evening when everything felt off. We had dinner together, and she was too sweet, too careful with her words, too light with her laughter. I watched her across the table, her smile stretching wider than usual, like someone wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. My son was tired and unaware, nodding to whatever she said, while her eyes flickered toward me every few seconds, searching, calculating, waiting for something. The room was warm, but my skin felt cold. That was the night I knew the storm I felt gathering was no longer just a feeling. It had a face now, and it was sitting right across the table from me. I finished my dinner quietly, my fork barely making a sound against the plate. I didn't ask questions because asking gives people a chance to lie, and I was tired of being lied to. Instead, I let my silence grow around me like a shield. I've learned over the years that silence unsettles those with guilty hearts. It makes them wonder how much you've seen, how much you've heard, and how much you're willing to reveal. That night I went to bed knowing this wasn't the beginning of a problem. It was the start of a storm that would either break me or reveal just how strong I'd always been. And I had no intention of breaking. It's a strange thing, how your heart can sense a shift long before your mind wants to admit it. And in those weeks that followed, the air in my own home began to feel heavier, as if it carried secrets that didn't belong to me. There was a night when the quiet was different, not peaceful like it used to be, but watchful, as though the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. I was sitting alone in the living room, the lamp casting a soft glow on the old photographs lined up on the shelf. Faces of people I loved staring back at me, reminding me of the years I had fought and built and endured. I could hear faint murmurs coming from their room at the far end of the hallway, not loud enough to make out every word, but clear enough for me to catch the coldness in her voice. It wasn't the voice of someone trying to solve a problem. It was the voice of someone plotting. She thought I was asleep most nights. She believed my age made me slow, unaware, but she had no idea how carefully I was listening, how quietly I was watching, how deep my roots of survival ran. She became bolder after that evening at the table. The sweetness on her face thinned like sugar melting in the rain. She didn't bother to hide her glances at my room anymore, didn't soften her tone when she spoke to my son about money, about the house, about things that were never hers to claim. I could feel the way her words wrapped around him, like silk threaded with poison, soft but deadly. He didn't notice how she was planting ideas, how she was slowly turning what we built as a family into something she could control. I'd walk past their door at night and hear her talking about how this house should be put in their name one day, how she deserved more, how old age should step aside for the young. My steps would slow at those moments, not because I was weak, but because I was memorizing every word. The heart may ache, but it never forgets words spoken in the dark. I stopped sharing small things with her, stopped letting her help with the laundry or sit with me during tea. The distance grew like a quiet wall between us, and with every brick she laid with her actions, I added one with my silence. My home was no longer just the place I lived, it was slowly becoming a battlefield where I had to stand guard, not with shouts or anger, but with watchful stillness. There were nights when I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the wind outside, reminding myself that I'd survived harder seasons than this. I'd whisper softly to myself, not out of fear, but out of preparation. Then one night, I caught a sound that didn't belong to the house. It wasn't the old pipes groaning or the wind brushing against the windows. It was the soft squeak of the hallway floor just outside my room. I kept my breathing even, my eyes on the ceiling, letting the moment stretch like a thin thread about to snap. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, too strong for someone simply passing by. She was close, too close. My hand rested lightly on the edge of the bed, steady and patient. That night, I understood something with painful clarity. She wasn't just curious anymore, she was waiting for her chance, and when it came, she would take it without a flicker of hesitation. But she didn't know that I was waiting too. She didn't know that age hadn't made me weak. It had made me sharper, steadier, and far more prepared than she could ever imagine. I went to sleep with my eyes open inside, knowing the next step she took would reveal everything. I learned a long time ago that when people show you what they're capable of, the wisest thing to do is not to panic, but to prepare. And that's exactly what I began to do in the days that followed. I stopped questioning why she lingered near my door at night, or why her voice grew bolder when she thought I couldn't hear. Instead, I started making quiet moves of my own, the kind that don't make noise, but build protection. I reached out to a trusted friend I've known for years, someone who understands the difference between keeping a secret and guarding a truth. And I told her everything, not with tears or panic, but with the calm voice of a woman who has lived long enough to know what danger looks like, even when it smiles. She helped me review every document, every paper that mattered, making sure what belonged to me stayed mine, no matter what anyone thought they could take. I also made a quiet visit to my lawyer, a man who's been handling my affairs for years, and I told him exactly what I suspected. How the air in my own house had changed, how trust had turned into something dangerous. We went through every file together, every signature, every lock, every detail, until everything was as secure as it could be. I wasn't going to confront her just yet, because confrontation gives people room to twist their stories, but silence and preparation make them trip on their own plans. Each night I returned home with a steady heart, walking through my hallway as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was no longer the woman waiting for betrayal. I was the woman ready to face it. And though she still moved like a shadow outside my door, what she didn't know was that I was already 10 steps ahead of her. There comes a moment when a person who has been quiet for too long decides to stand a little taller, not with loud words or anger, but with quiet certainty. And that moment came for me, not long after I met with my lawyer. I remember sitting by the window that morning, watching the cold wind move through the bare trees, the light slipping softly into the room, and feeling something inside me settle. I had spent weeks sensing the storm around me, and now I finally felt ready for it. I didn't need to shout to protect what was mine. I just needed to be steady. I began putting everything in its place carefully. Not just the legal papers, but the pieces of my life that I refused to let anyone snatch away. I tucked the most important documents where no curious hand could reach them, placed the key where only I could find it, and secured every single thing that held weight in my world. I wasn't just locking away property, I was locking away my dignity, my history, and the quiet power I had spent a lifetime building. She moved around the house like nothing was happening, humming softly when she thought I wasn't paying attention, smiling that polished smile that no longer fooled me. She had no idea that behind my stillness, a plan was already set, one that didn't need anyone's permission. My son walked around unaware, caught in the warmth of her carefully chosen words, blind to how sharp they really were. But I wasn't blind. I watched, and I remembered. That's what age teaches you. To notice, to remember, to wait for the right moment. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't feel the uneasiness that had followed me before. Instead, I felt a strange kind of calm. The kind that comes when you've prepared for everything you can and stopped giving fear the power to shake you. I knew the moment she made her move, she wouldn't be walking into my weakness. She would be walking straight into my strength. I closed my eyes with my mind fully awake, knowing the storm wasn't coming anymore. It was already here, and this time, I was ready to face it. That night carried a silence unlike any other. The kind that presses against your skin and makes the air itself feel alive. I lay there with my eyes closed, the weight of the blanket steady on me, my breathing soft and even, pretending to sleep but waiting, every sense awake. I heard it first as the smallest shift, a gentle press of a foot on the hallway floor, the wood letting out that faint groan that only old houses know how to make. She thought she was being careful. But this house was built with my hands, and I knew every sound it made. The scent of her perfume reached me before her shadow did, and in that moment, my heart didn't race, it steadied. This was the night she had been waiting for, and it was the night I had prepared for. I listened as the soft click of the door broke the stillness, slow and deliberate. She pushed it open just wide enough to slide through, thinking I was deep in sleep, unaware of the weight of her steps. But I was aware of everything. The way her breath caught for a moment, the way she paused at the foot of my bed as if making sure I hadn't moved, the way her hands hovered near the drawer like a thief rehearsing their lines. She crouched low, the quiet sound of wood sliding against wood filling the room as she pulled the drawer open. I kept my breathing steady, letting the darkness cover the sharpness in my eyes. For a moment, time stretched thin, every second folding into the next. She had imagined this moment so many times, convinced she was clever, convinced I was helpless. But in that single breath, all her secrets, all her greedy little plans, stepped into the light she thought would never reach her. She didn't know that my silence wasn't sleep. It was watchfulness. She didn't know that what she would find inside that drawer would not be what she came for. She didn't know that while she believed she was hunting, she had walked straight into the trap built with her own hands. And as the drawer opened fully, I heard the smallest gasp escape her mouth, soft but sharp enough to cut through the quiet night like a blade. She had finally seen what was waiting for her. The silence stretched long after her gasp, thicker now, heavier with the weight of what she had just seen. I stayed still, my eyes still closed, though inside my mind was awake, every thought sharper than the last. She was still standing there, frozen, as if the world around her had suddenly shifted. I could almost hear the thoughts racing through her, the confusion, the disbelief, and the fear. She had expected something simple, something she could take without a second thought. But what she found instead was a lifetime of careful planning, a testament to everything she thought she could take from me. Inside that drawer wasn't just a key, it wasn't just cash or trinkets like she imagined. It was proof, written in ink and sealed in paper, of every truth she had tried to hide, of every lie she had carefully spun. There were notarized documents, the ones that made everything real. There were photos, old ones, ones she didn't know existed, ones that captured her every lie, her every attempt to manipulate the situation. And then, there were the recordings, the ones she thought no one would ever hear. She didn't know that while she was busy plotting, I had been quietly listening. The truth had been documented long before she had even considered it, and now, it was all laid bare in front of her. The weight of her realization hit her like a cold wind, and I could almost feel it. She was standing there, frozen in the stillness of the moment, her breath quickening, her mind scrambling for the words to say. But there was nothing to say. The truth didn't need words. All she could do was stare at the evidence, at the undeniable proof that her world was about to unravel. In the stillness of that room, I could hear her thoughts, her panic rising with each passing second. And yet, I stayed calm, my breath steady, knowing that this was the moment when everything would change. She thought she was clever, that she could outsmart me. But what she didn't know was that I had been playing a different game all along, one she could never win. The morning light came softly through the curtains, golden and quiet, but the house didn't feel the same. The air carried a weight that only the guilty can create, a kind of stillness that sinks deep into the walls and lingers in every corner. I rose from my bed with the same steady calm that had carried me through the night, and as I stepped into the hallway, I could feel the tremor beneath the surface of everything. She was already in the kitchen, moving around with restless hands, pretending to be busy with things she didn't care about, just to keep from looking at me. I watched her for a moment, how her shoulders stiffened when she sensed my presence, how she avoided meeting my eyes, as if the truth she saw last night was still staring right back at her. She poured herself a cup of coffee, but her hands were shaking, the clink of the spoon against the mug too loud for such a quiet morning. My son sat at the table, unaware of the storm sitting right next to him. He greeted me like any other morning, and I answered softly, keeping my voice even, letting the silence between us do most of the talking. She forced a smile, that same practiced one she had used so many times, but today it didn't sit right on her face. It faltered, thin and uneasy, like a mask that no longer fit. I walked to the cupboard slowly, every step deliberate, letting the air tighten around us. I turned to her and said, just as calmly as if I were mentioning the weather, that I moved the keys last night. She froze, the spoon slipping from her hand and hitting the counter, the sound small but sharp, cutting through the kitchen like a blade. My son didn't understand the weight of my words, but she did. Her eyes widened just slightly, and in that single glance, I saw everything she was trying to hide. Guilt isn't loud. It lives in the small tremors, in the eyes that can't hold a gaze, in the hands that can't stay still. I sat down slowly, sipping my tea, not saying another word. The silence stretched between us, pressing against her like a hand on her throat. I didn't need to raise my voice or call out what she did. She knew I knew. That was enough. I watched her face, the way her mind spun behind her eyes, trying to find a way to fix what couldn't be undone. She tried to laugh lightly, to pretend she didn't understand, but the fear sitting behind that smile gave her away. She looked at me, and then looked away. And in that moment, I saw the shift. She wasn't in control anymore. That power she thought she had taken from me had slipped through her fingers like sand, and it would never return. Later that day, when the house had settled into that fragile quiet that comes after a storm begins to crack the air, I asked them both to come into the living room. My voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that makes people shift in their seats because they know something is coming. She walked in first, stiff and uneasy, with that same forced smile that no longer had any strength left in it. My son followed, confused but curious, unaware of the shadow that had already fallen over everything he thought was steady. I sat in my chair, the same one that had carried me through years of joy and sorrow, and placed the key gently on the table in front of me. That single sound, the small click against the wood, filled the room like a thunderclap. She froze where she stood, and I watched how her breath caught in her chest, how her hands clenched even though she tried to hide it. My son glanced at the key and then at me, still not understanding, still trapped in the space between innocence and realization. I didn't rush my words. I didn't need to. I looked at her and said that I had been awake last night. I told her in a voice steady as stone that I saw her open that drawer, that I heard the gasp she tried to swallow, that I felt her fear fill the room like smoke. For a moment, she said nothing. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, because guilt always falters when it's finally seen. She tried to speak then, fumbling for soft words, trying to twist what happened into something small and harmless, but I didn't give her that space. I leaned forward just slightly, not raising my voice, but letting every word fall heavy and clear. I told her I knew what she was after, that I had prepared for it long before she ever thought she could outsmart me, that everything inside that drawer had been placed there for a reason. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, and I didn't break. I simply let the truth sit between us like a mirror she couldn't look away from. My son finally understood, his face shifting as the pieces slid into place. I saw it in the way his shoulders sank, the way his eyes moved between us, realizing that the woman he trusted had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She lowered her eyes, and for the first time, she had no mask left to wear. I told her calmly that what she saw in that drawer was more than proof. It was a warning. I had built my life with open hands, but I also knew how to protect what was mine. I reminded her that she could lie to herself, she could lie to him, but she couldn't lie to me anymore. The room felt heavy with the truth, a truth that didn't need shouting to be heard. It simply stood there, unshakable and final. The hours that followed felt quiet, but not in a peaceful way. More like a silence that had weight. A silence that carried the sharp edges of everything that had just been said. She avoided me completely, moving through the house like someone trying to disappear inside their own shadow. But guilt is something you can never really outrun. My son barely spoke a word either, the truth sitting between them like a wall he didn't know how to climb. I sat in my chair, watching the sun fade slowly through the window, feeling the shift I had known would come. There was no shouting, no tears, no chaos. There was just the truth standing firm where lies had tried to take root. Later that evening, I heard the sound of drawers opening and closing in their room, the kind of hurried movements people make when they know they've been caught and there's nothing left to save. She packed quietly, and I didn't stop her. I didn't need to. Her actions were already louder than any apology she could have given. My son stood in the hallway, torn between the woman he thought he loved and the mother who had carried him through every storm of his life. But this wasn't a battle for me to fight. I had already done my part by standing firm. Whether he followed or stayed was his choice to make. When she finally walked past me, suitcase in hand, she didn't look me in the eye. She didn't need to. We both knew that night had changed everything. My son followed her a few days later, his silence saying more than his words ever could. I didn't try to stop him either. Sometimes letting go isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength, a way of drawing a line that cannot be crossed again. When the door finally closed behind them, the house felt heavier for a moment, but then the air slowly shifted. It wasn't the same as before, but it was honest again. Honest air carries a different kind of stillness, one that doesn't creep around corners or wait in the dark. I sat there in that quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs to no one but me, and I felt no bitterness, only the steady beat of a heart that had stood its ground. People think revenge needs fire, but sometimes the greatest revenge is silence, truth, and walking away with your peace untouched. She thought she could take everything, but what she didn't understand was that my strength was never locked inside that drawer. It was inside me all along, and that was something she could never steal. In the days that followed, the house settled back into its own quiet rhythm, the kind that no longer carried the weight of hidden whispers or cautious steps in the night. I walked through each room slowly, not because I was tired, but because I could breathe again. The spaces that once felt tense now felt calm, as if the house itself had let out a long, silent sigh. I didn't need to explain anything to anyone. The truth had already done that for me. I made myself a cup of tea each morning and sat by the same window where I had once watched the storm building, but now all I saw was the clear sky that follows after the worst has passed. There were no regrets in my heart. I had loved, I had trusted, and when trust was broken, I stood my ground. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't break down. I simply let the truth stand on its own, and that was enough. I've learned in life that not everyone who smiles at you means you well. And sometimes the ones closest to you will try to take what they did not build. But if you know who you are and protect what matters, they can never truly win. My peace is mine again, and that is something no one can steal. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of my story. I hope it reached your heart the way it lives in mine. If you felt something while listening, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what you think. Your time means a lot to me. Truly.